And welcome again to I Love Black People. We've been blessed today to have a wonderful brother join us, a brother who's guided me on this tour of Pan-Africanism, of enlightenment, and reconnecting to our origins in a way that I could never ever be as thankful as I could, but we try to pay forward in this space. So with that being said, I want to bring on incredible brother, my brother, your brother, Brother Obi Egbuna. Good day, my brother.
Become a Prime member today by visiting iloveblackpeople.com and receive our free I Love Black People t-shirt, Black Survival Guide, and become a part of our I Love Black People network, which comes with a global safety toolkit, nomad health insurance, Pan-African certification classes, and so much more. Go to iloveblackpeople.com now.
What's up, African? How are you? Thanks for having me on this morning.
Humbly. And we appreciate you. And I know as a part of your teaching, you always start off, with a context, even talking about the word black, as opposed to using the word African. Why don't you give us some of your background and then do some teaching on word usage and what it means?
Well, in terms of me, I'm a journalist. I'm a teacher, an African history teacher, K through 12 for children, and I'm a children's playwright. And today, so I've been teaching for 31 years. I've been writing as a journalist. I've been the U.S. correspondent to Zimbabwe's national newspaper, the Herald, since 2008. And I'm a co-founder of the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company and the main advisor to the Mass Emphasis Positive Action and Creativity Youth Brigade, which has been around for 3 years. And the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company has been around for 10 years. In that capacity, I've had the privilege of writing 25 plays, of which 21 have been performed. So, but in terms of the identity question, it's abundantly clear from the perspective of representing a people who can be found in 125 countries tonight. The 55 countries that make up our mother continent, our continent of origin, and the 70 countries commonly referred to in political and academic and even social circles as the diaspora. But it is also precise that we know that we only have one place in common. We all don't have Australia in common, even though we've been there 80,000 years. We all don't have India in common, even though 160 million of us call that home. We all don't have Brazil in common, where 90 million of us call that home. We all don't have the Americas in common, where when you look at North America, South America, Central America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, nearly 200 million of us call that home. The only place we have home is Africa. And as Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah put it so succinctly, many years ago, he said, I'm not an African because I was born in Africa, but I'm an African because Africa was born inside of me. And Brother Malcolm complimented that sentiment by saying that just because a kitten is born in the oven doesn't make it a biscuit. So even though animals are born in the zoo every day, no polar bear, you could never call the National Zoo of Washington the home of the polar bear, the home of the giraffe, the home of the monkey, the home of the tiger, the home of the lion. So when it comes to human beings, it's coincidental that they're the only species on Earth where birthplace determines your identity, not your history, not your culture, not your epistemology, not your anthropology. So for us, we take it back to Bishop Richard Allen and Absalom Jones when they started the Free African Society in the 1700s. And we've come full circle. We did Negro with the small n, Negro with the capital N, Black with the small b, Black with the capital B. And then Reverend Jesse Jackson in the 90s said African American. Obviously, you had to be emphasizing African. So we've come full circle. So on the question of identity, we shared the sentiments of James Weldon Johnson in the very last line of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which they don't let our children sing, true to our God, true to our native land. And even though we weren't there in 1923 when he wrote that, we know he wasn't saying be true to Alabama, be true to Mississippi, be true to Virginia. We would like to think he was saying be true to Algeria, be true to Angola, be true to Benin, be true to Botswana, be true to Burkina Faso, be true to Burundi, be true to Cameroon, be true to Cape Verde, be true to Central African Republic, be true to Chad, Be true to Comoros Islands, be true to the Congo, be true to Cote d'Ivoire, be true to Djibouti, be true to the DRC, be true to Egypt/Kemet, Ethiopia, Eritrea, so on and so on and so on.
I think that's a great context. And again, we always try to make sure that we give our people as much information so they're empowered to make decisions. And those decisions should be informed decisions and effective decisions. So thank you so much. And again, Obi, having, that ability to teach like you do and have the patience with us like you do. Again, my patience is awful, but as an engineer, I can kind of like just work with inanimate objects and concepts. The fact that you have the ability to work with us and be patient with us and continue this legacy for our prodigies is definitely, we're thankful for it. And having you black is also a great thing to have you on our show. And that being said, what have you been doing lately that could also inform and educate us?
Well, we recently celebrated African Liberation Day properly. We say African Liberation Day because these neo-colonialist governments in Africa suggest that they remove liberation and say Africa Day, which means that and if you go to Wikipedia, it says Africa Day, formerly known as African Liberation Day. Now, historically speaking, we feel the same way Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did when he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. And he said that the anti-colonial movement in Africa was moving at the pace of a jet, and our movement in the fight against modern-day segregation was moving like a horse attached to a buggy. So we are proud of the fact that from March 6, 1957, when Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party attained their independence from settler colonialism, from 1957 to 1960, 35 nations in Africa got their flag independence. It's the most rapid swing towards progress the human being has ever witnessed. So we're very proud of that. And the fact that we even have a poem that we teach children about that. It's called No More, No More. So it goes like this. Gold Coast, no more today, it's Ghana. British Tanganyika, no more today, it's Tanzania. Northern Rhodesia, no more today, it's Zambia. Southern Rhodesia, no more today, it's Zimbabwe. Portuguese East Africa, no more today, it's Mozambique. Southwest Africa, no more today, it's Namibia. Upper Volta, no more today, it's Burkina Faso. Colonial names for African nations, no more. African names for African nations, African names for African people, no more. And we start children, kindergartners off to be precise and specific with that. So we're very proud of that. But with that being said, neo-colonialism is real. Mobutu was not a figment of our imagination who assassinated Lumumba in cold blood and poured acid on his body. Houphouët-Boigny, who in his living room, the overthrow of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was planned. The assassination of Amilcar Cabral was planned. The assassination attempt on Ahmed Sékou Touré was planned. The assassination on Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso was planned in his living room. He wasn't a figment of our imagination. Omar Bongo in the Gabon, he wasn't a figment of our imagination. Bokassa in the Central African Republic, he wasn't a figment of our imagination. And in a historical moment when of the 25 extremely poorest nations in the world, and the category extremely poor is reserved for a demographic on the planet at this time of 784 million people who live on $1.90 a day or less. 400 million of them can be found in Mother Africa, and 22 of the 25 extremely poor nations in this world are in Mother Africa. And when Kwame Touré taught us a long time ago that we are the richest continent in the world, but we're the poorest people in the world, that is real. So based on that reality, based on that trajectory, based on that dynamic, based on that challenge, how can any government stand before us and say that we are free, we are liberated, we are masters of our own destiny, when many of them have to get on their knees like they're praying and beg the United States Agency for International Development for humanitarian aid, beg the Bill Gates Foundation for humanitarian aid, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for humanitarian aid, beg the George Bush Foundation for humanitarian aid. That's not the posture. That's not the position. That's not standing upright, as Burkina Faso is properly named. So for them, these neo-colonialist governments who spit in the face of our tradition of resistance by suggesting that Mother Africa is free. Now, that does not mean that the powerful blows we sent to the settler colonialists, be it in the form of armed struggle. Algeria winning an 8-year armed struggle with France, Kenya winning an armed struggle with Britain, Zimbabwe winning an armed struggle against Britain, Namibia winning an armed struggle against Germany, Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique winning an armed struggle against Portuguese colonialism. Well, of course, we're proud of that. Eritrea fighting a 30-year guerrilla war, the longest guerrilla war ever waged on the African continent. And it is in the spirit of that tradition that we still celebrate African Liberation Day. Now, that's on the continental side. In the diaspora, in the United States, in particular North America, our peoples have been celebrating Kwanzaa since the late 1960s, and we must thank Maulana Karenga for that contribution. But for some reason, a trend has been in existence for a long time now, where people celebrate Kwanzaa by the thousands, hundreds of thousands. But when it comes time to celebrate African Liberation Day, they go in hiding like fugitives on the run from the FBI. That must change, because African Liberation Day is a day that always focused on our resistance. For those who don't know the history, it began on April 15th, 1958, at the Council of Independent African States. They had a meeting in Ghana convened by Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. So we unanimously and democratically and collectively decided that that would be our day. And then 5 years later, when the Organization of African Unity was created, today recognized as the African Union, we changed the day to May 25th. So since May 25th, 1963, we've been celebrating it. It took flight in the United States 9 years later in 1972. And it is through that platform that we were introduced to the three liberation movements in what's called South Africa: the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and the Black Consciousness Movement of Azania, which became ZAPU. It is there we were introduced to the Eritrean Revolution. It was there that we were introduced to SWAPO in Namibia, ZANU and ZAPU in Zimbabwe, MPLA in Angola, FRELIMO in Mozambique. It was there that we were reintroduced to the struggle in the Congo. It was there that we get a chance to learn about the modern day resistance on the African continent, so we could see the undeniable parallels between our modern day resistance on the African continent and our struggle in the United States. Through African Liberation Day, we learned that Medgar Evers and Patrice Lumumba are born on the same exact day. Through African Liberation Day, we learned that 1896 is special on the continent because Mbuyane of Zimbabwe ignited an armed struggle in 1896. And for those of us in the United States who have been force-fed an amputated narrative of our collective experience, we know that 1896 is when Booker T. Washington hired a humble agronomist named George Washington Carver. 1896 is when the National Medical Association was created, because based on segregationist policies of the American Medical Association at the time, we could not join. 1896 is when Plessy versus Ferguson was started. And 1896 is when the National Association of Colored Women was started, which is the most recent play we did, called The Sister's Touch on Struggle, which pays homage to the National Association of Colored Women.
Okay,
So African Liberation Day has always been a way to bring together the resistance.
Now, I think this is probably more in a more of a I won't say a negative way, but I think it's consistent with the oppression. Our brother George Floyd was murdered by the state, by the police, by the United States government on May 25th.
That's right.
African Liberation Day.
That's right.
Now, is that something that can be used as an opportunity to better connect our common shared experiences, or is that something that is a distraction, or how do you see that coming as a? Because I think sometimes what I hear is that we'll elevate one particular person in the United States where we have masses of people being oppressed globally, or we have a conversation about how when someone gets harmed in the United States, it's attributed to one individual, the name of the police officer, and not the state. But then when you hear something happening in another country, even if it is involving the police locally, it'll be the entire government somehow was involved, and they'll even name the president. But if somebody gets killed in the United States, no one names Biden. They just name whatever local official. But somebody gets killed in Africa is attributed to the president of the country.
Well, I'll say it like this. The character of resistance doesn't determine the authenticity of the resistance. So in this country, yes, there's George Floyd, there's Trayvon Martin, there's Oscar Grant, there's Deontay Rollins, there's Sandra Bland. But we thank the Malcolm X grassroots movement for pointing out that law enforcement kills Africans every 28 hours in the United States of America. So it's an indictment on United States political culture because police terrorism, naked police terrorism, notice I did not say police brutality, I said police terrorism, because when you say police brutality, it suggests that these are isolated incidents of bad judgment, not something cultural, not something that represents that it's the staple of the political culture of the United States of America.
Police terrorism, police terrorism.
Naked
Woo!
police terrorism with no parameters, no boundaries, or no apologies. And we say that because keep in mind, your articulation represents your experience. So today you're talking to a 31-year veteran of the struggle to eradicate naked police terrorism in the United States, which is inextricably linked to the struggle to end United States military policy, United States foreign policy, United States Africa policy. So in the 1990s, when we shut this country down over the Rodney King verdict, which Jane Fonda called the character of our resistance in comparison to what happened last summer. She said what we did in the 90s was hateful. But basically, authentic African nationalism makes white liberals extremely paranoid. And that's always been the case, and that will continue to be the case. That's their hang up, not ours, because we know we have beautified nationalism for the world. We have purified nationalism for the world. Thanks to the anti-colonial movement in Africa, people don't look at Julius Caesar when they think of nationalism. People don't think of Pontius Pilate when they think of nationalism. People don't think of Mussolini and Hitler and Franco when they think about nationalism, or Otto von Bismarck, who chaired the Berlin Conference. When they think of nationalism now, they think of Mangalizo Sobukwe, they think of Amilcar Cabral, they think of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, they think of the Nation of Islam, they think about the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association because of those developments. So we have beautified nationalism for the world. So we are very proud of that. And based on that, so when we were fighting in the 1990s, dealing with the Rodney King verdict in this country, military neocolonialism in Africa was had a dent in its armor. Babangida and Abacha in Nigeria were overthrown. There was more resistance against the CIA-trained mercenaries UNITA in Angola, Renamo in Mozambique, Moussa Traoré, who overthrew the great Modibo Keïta in 1968 in Mali, he was overthrown. Mobutu, the godfather of military neocolonialism, was overthrown. So when we say don't police us in Ferguson, don't police us in Baltimore, that includes saying don't police us in Nigeria, don't police us in Zimbabwe, don't police us in South Africa, don't police us in Mali, don't police us in Brazil, don't police us in Colombia. Don't police Africans anywhere we are in the world. And since we know that the United States military apparatus, be it in the form of the police, and remember, we're in Washington, D.C., Brother Sinclair, so we see more police in 24 hours than the whole world sees in a lifetime. We got library police, the Capitol Hill police, who are trained by Zionist Israel, by the way. You have the ATF, the DEA, the FBI, the CIA, the Pentagon, once again, celebrating the culture that is glorified on Veterans Day, glorified on Memorial Day, glorified on Thanksgiving, even glorified on Christmas, because Jesus Christ is a police terrorism victim. So when we take a look at that and we put it in the right context, we always have merged the resistance. And from that, that's why we fight Zionism in Israel. That's why we fight against AFRICOM on the African continent, the United States Africa Military Command. But it comes all the way back to if we're focusing on the most local act of police terrorism. And that has always been the character of our fight, and we know that it puts us on a collision course with both the Democrats and the Republicans, and now we have to come to focus on the culture. This is why a few years ago, our children in the Mass Emphasis Positive Action and Creativity Youth Brigade, they created a mini doc saying that Africans should not play police officers on television or in the movies. They should not play military officers on television or in the movies, or they should not play intelligence agents in the movies. You understand what I'm saying? So that fight continues. That's our sentiment, that's our staple, that's the cornerstone of our resistance. Don't police us anywhere in the world. And this is why their biggest fear is our people moving forward are not going to join the police, are not going to join the FBI, are not going to join the CIA, are not going to join the Secret Service, are not going to join the Navy, are not going to join the Air Force, are not going to join the Marines. It is cultural warfare at the end of the day. This is why it's no coincidence that if you ask a child what's the first thing they think of Tuskegee, they say the Tuskegee Airmen and not Booker T. Washington. So the fight is on all fronts, but it's a fight that we're going to win.
Now, relate this back to some of the work that you've been doing with the children and some of the projects you got ongoing.
Well, the most recent play we did was called A Sister's Touch and Struggle, and we came to touch on the history of the National Association of Colored Women. Because of what we call podium subculture, and we have we have more spokespeople, so-called African Americans, commonly referred to U.S.-born Africans. Everyone's at a podium, everyone's in front of a microphone. So based on that, we are strangers to labor, strangers to service, strangers to sacrifice. And people think contributing to struggle is just expressing their displeasure with oppression or exploitation or dehumanization. So we felt that it was necessary to expose our children to what happened on July 21st, 1896. The National Association of Colored Women was founded. The founding members were Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Nannie Helen Burroughs, Mary Church Terrell, Margaret Murray Washington, the wife of Booker T. Washington, Rosetta Douglass, the daughter of Frederick Douglass. They came together in Washington, D.C. and created this organization in 1896. Most people think the first women's organization that we created is the National Council of Negro Women. They borrowed that blueprint. And as we know, Mary McLeod Bethune was trained by Mary Church Terrell. Mary McLeod Bethune trained Dr. Dorothy Height. So those women, and they were brought together by a woman who is not as well known as them, named Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, who was the first African woman in U.S. history to create a newspaper called The Woman's Era. So these women created that organization, and we felt that it was very important to bring this up because we know that one of the challenges we have when you work with children, part of the decolonization process, we must transform the island of Black excellence into a training ground for African resistance. I'm going to repeat that. Our goal is to transform the island of Black excellence into a training ground for African resistance. And for some people who feel that's too militant and some who feel that's too intense, you may want to get a one-way ticket to Wakanda and Zamunda and call it a day. And so we targeted these women because when you look at their academic accomplishments, you have Anna Julia Cooper, who got her PhD at the age of 67 and taught at the M Street Colored School, today known as Dunbar. You have Mary Church Terrell, who spoke 4 languages, who was an eloquent writer. You have Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, one of the finest journalists of her time. You have Ida B. Wells, who was one of the most incredible journalists. And the reason she became the face of our movement against lynching was because of 2 books she created called the one called Southern Horrors, the other one called The Red Record. You look at how Margaret Murray Washington started teaching at 14 years old. So these women definitely were excellent in terms of their individual accomplishments, their individual status, but they were 100% committed to the liberation of our people. They were 100% committed to the frontline resistance of our people. They never pursued individual excellence in isolation from their collective service and their collective responsibility, their historical responsibility. The other reason we felt obligated to do this play is because one of the other things we have to change is this narrative. We treat in the movement the 1960s the way Christians treat the Garden of Eden, like it's the beginning and ending of everything. So many feel that our struggle started in 1955 with the slaughtering of Emmett Till, the Montgomery bus boycott, the resistance of Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks, and it ends on April 4th, 1968, 7:01 Central Time in Memphis, Tennessee, with the assassination of Dr. King. So there's not that much emphasis on our resistance in the 70s, our resistance in the 80s, our resistance in the 90s, and our resistance right now. So it suggests that we have been we were asleep all this time, and George Floyd woke us up. This is the bogus narrative that Joe Biden is pushing. This is the bogus narrative that the Democratic machine in the African community is pushing. And but what they aren't telling you is what it was. Is many of us were in hibernation from 2008 to 2016 during the Obama presidency, and some of us were under hypnosis. But the resistance, the most genuine resistance, has never stopped. And we were fighting against the feudal lords in Mother Africa. And then, of course, the colonialists and the kidnappers interrupted that. Then we turned our focus to them. Since we've been dealing with that, we've been fighting on the African continent. We've been having a class struggle. Amilcar Cabral was correct when he said struggle is daily action against our enemies and daily action against ourselves, meaning those of us who embrace the cultural values of the enemies, the political ideologies of the enemies. So struggle started when the earth began. Struggle will end when the earth began. Some of us struggle to attain liberation. Some of us struggle to maintain liberation. In Eritrea, they're fighting to remain liberated. In Zimbabwe, they're fighting to remain liberated. In Namibia, they're fighting to remain liberated. 40 million of us in the United States have never had liberation, have never had power. We have settled for a seductive appetizer commonly referred to as justice. But nevertheless, the resistance is genuine, the resistance is heartfelt, and we just seek to keep it going. So the reason that we did this play was to expose these young children, as this year marks the Year of the Woman internationally, to these women. And we did different parts of the play. One of the key parts is what happened in 1913. You had the suffrage parade in Washington, D.C.
Become a Prime member today by visiting iloveblackpeople.com and receive our free I Love Black People t-shirt, Black Survival Guide, and become a part of our I Love Black People network, which comes with a global safety toolkit, nomad health insurance, Pan-African certification classes, and so much more. Go to iloveblackpeople.com now. Special thanks to Banneker Communities. Stay tuned for episode 2 of this series next week. Log on to iloveblackpeople.com.
With I am because I am definitely because of good brother Obi. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everyone have a great and amazing day.